Katherine Miller flinched as the swinging doors of the Golden Nugget Saloon creaked open, revealing the imposing figure of Judge Rutherford, the most powerful man in Rico, Colorado. It was 1878, and in a town teetering between lawlessness and civilization, his word was as good as gospel. Katherine had only been working as a barmaid for 3 weeks, just long enough to save for a ticket east, but in that short time, she'd learned that a woman alone had to guard her expressions carefully. "Evening, Miss Miller," the judge drawled, his eyes roaming over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "How about a whiskey and one of those pretty smiles?" Katherine poured his drink with steady hands, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She offered a tight, perfunctory smile, the same one she gave all customers, and turned to serve another patron. "I said a real smile, girl," the judge growled, catching her wrist. "When a man pays good money in an establishment, he expects proper service." "Yes, sir," Katherine replied softly, forcing her lips to curve upward while her eyes remained wary. A man at the end of the bar, a cattle baron named Silas Thornton, noticed the exchange. His calculating gaze lingered on Katherine's face before he leaned toward his companion. "Pretty little thing, ain't she? Got spirit, too." Katherine tried to focus on her work, but she could feel their eyes on her throughout the evening. When Judge Rutherford departed, leaving a coin that gleamed too brightly for a simple whiskey, she exhaled with relief. The relief was short-lived. The following evening, her employer, Mrs. Holloway, called her to the back room with a grim expression. "I've had an offer for your services, Katherine," the older woman said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Not as a barmaid." Katherine's blood ran cold. "I don't understand." "Judge Rutherford and Mr. Thornton have taken an interest. They've made arrangements." "Arrangements," Katherine repeated, her voice barely audible. "You're to go to Thornton's ranch. He's paid a handsome sum." "For what?" Katherine demanded, though she already knew Mrs. Holloway's face hardened. "Don't play innocent, girl. You smiled at the judge. You know what happens to women who catch men's eyes in this town." "I was being polite. That's what you told me to do." Katherine's voice rose in panic. "Lower your voice," Mrs. Holloway hissed. "The deal is done. Thornton's men are coming for you tomorrow." "I won't go," Katherine insisted, backing toward the door. "You can't sell me like cattle." Mrs. Holloway laughed bitterly. "Look around you, girl. This is Rico. Men like Thornton and Rutherford own everything and everyone. Your parents are gone. You've got no family, no protector. What choice do you have?" Katherine fled to her small room above the saloon, mind racing. She had $12 saved, not enough for a stagecoach ticket, not enough to start over elsewhere. As night fell, she packed her meager possessions with trembling hands. She would leave before dawn, walk if necessary. Anything was better than being sold to satisfy a man's whim. Dawn was still hours away when Katherine heard boots on the stairs. They'd come early. Heart pounding, she slipped out the window onto the awning below, her small carpet bag clutched to her chest. The drop to the ground was jarring, but she kept her feet and darted into the alley, only to collide with a solid form in the darkness. Strong hands steadied her. "Whoa there, miss." Katherine jerked back, ready to scream, when she realized the man before her wasn't one of Thornton's men. In the dim light from a nearby window, she could make out a lean face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, eyes that seemed to assess her situation in an instant. "Please," she whispered. "I need to get away." The stranger studied her for a moment longer, then nodded toward the end of the alley. "My horse is tethered at the livery. Thornton's men are checking the stage depot and North Road." "How did you—" "Word travels, especially when it involves the judge and Thornton." He hesitated. "Name's Xavier Grayson. Most folks call me Gray." "Katherine Miller," she replied automatically, then regretted giving her real name. "Well, Miss Miller, I suggest we move before those fellas circle back this way." Katherine hesitated only a moment. This stranger might be dangerous, but staying meant certain captivity. "Why would you help me?" A wry smile touched Xavier's lips. "Let's just say I've got my reasons to dislike Thornton's methods. Now, are you coming?" They moved swiftly through town, keeping to shadows. At the livery, Xavier saddled his horse, a magnificent palomino, and helped Katherine mount before swinging up behind her. "Where are we going?" she whispered as they rode slowly out of town, avoiding main streets. "I've got a cabin about 15 miles west, near the old silver mine." "We'll lay low until we figure out your next move." Katherine stiffened. "I don't need charity. Just get me to the next town and I'll—" "Thornton's reach extends farther than you think, Miss Miller," Xavier interrupted. "Trust me on this, you need more than distance." As they crested a hill, Katherine glanced back at Rico, its buildings silhouetted against the lightening sky. She'd come west full of hope after her parents died, believing the frontier offered opportunity for a woman willing to work hard. Now she was fleeing like a criminal, trusting a stranger because she had no alternative. "You said you have reasons to dislike Thornton," she ventured as they picked their way along a narrow trail. "What are they?" Xavier was silent so long Katherine thought he might not answer. "Finally," he said, "he took something of mine, something I can't get back." They rode in silence after that, the miles passing beneath the palomino's steady gait. The sun had fully risen by the time they reached a small cabin nestled in a stand of pines. A creek bubbled nearby, and a lean-to shelter housed another horse and some chickens. Xavier helped her down, his hands strong but impersonal at her waist. "It's not much, but it's secure. No one comes this way except the occasional prospector." The cabin was simple but clean, a far cry from the cramped room above the saloon. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a bed with a patchwork quilt in the corner, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding books, supplies, and cooking implements. "Make yourself at home," Xavier said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at his neck. "I'll fetch some water and see about breakfast." Left alone, Katherine sank onto a chair, the events of the past hours catching up to her. She'd fled one man's possession only to put herself in another's power. But Xavier Grayson seemed different. There was a quietness to him, a contained strength that didn't intimidate. Still, she knew better than to trust appearances. When he returned, carrying water and a handful of eggs, he found her examining a Winchester rifle that had been mounted above the door. "It's loaded," he said mildly. "In case you're wondering." Katherine placed the rifle carefully on the table. "I don't intend to shoot you, Mr. Grayson." "Unless you give me cause." A rare smile crossed his features, transforming his solemn face. "Fair enough, and it's just gray. Mr. Grayson was my father." As he prepared a simple meal of eggs and biscuits left from his previous day's baking, Katherine watched him move with the efficiency of a man accustomed to fending for himself. "Have you lived here long?" she asked. "About 2 years, since I left Texas." "You're a Texan," he nodded. "Born and raised on a ranch near Austin." "What brought you to Colorado?" Xavier's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Change of scenery." They ate in silence, Katherine ravenous despite her anxiety. Afterward, he showed her the creek where she could wash, gave her an extra shirt to sleep in, and began making up a pallet for himself near the fireplace. "Take the bed," he said, not looking at her. "I'll sleep here." "Thank you," Katherine said, too exhausted to argue about propriety. "For everything." Xavier paused in his preparations. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Miller. Thornton isn't a man who gives up what he considers his, and he's had his eye on you since you arrived in Rico." "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know what happens in town, even if I don't spend much time there." Why would he want me? There are other women. Katherine trailed off, embarrassed. Thornton collects things: land, cattle, people, especially things others desire. Xavier's eyes were shadowed. The judge wanted you. That was enough. Katherine shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. What will happen now? You'll stay here until we figure out a safer place for you. Thornton will have men watching the stage lines, the railroad stations. I can't impose on you indefinitely, Katherine protested. Xavier shrugged. I've got space and supplies. Your presence doesn't burden me. But it did change things, Katherine realized as she settled onto the bed that night. The cabin that had seemed spacious enough for one person felt intimate with two. She could hear Xavier's steady breathing across the room, feel his presence even with her eyes closed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. "Gray," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes." His reply was immediate, telling her he was also awake. "What did Thornton take from you?" The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, his voice came, low and controlled. "My brother's life. My family's ranch. My reason for staying in Texas." Katherine's breath caught. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Get some rest, Miss Miller. Tomorrow will come soon enough." The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Xavier taught Katherine about the forest surrounding them, how to move quietly, how to read animal tracks. He showed her how to handle the Winchester, though his calm instruction couldn't mask her flinch at each loud report. They fished in the creek, harvested wild berries, and tended the small garden behind the cabin. In the evenings, they read by lamplight. Xavier had an impressive collection of books for a cabin in the wilderness, or he told her stories of his childhood in Texas, careful to avoid the painful parts. Katherine, in turn, shared memories of her life in Pennsylvania before her parents' death from influenza left her alone at 20. "Why did you come west?" Xavier asked one evening as they sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "I had a cousin in Denver who offered me a place to stay. But when I arrived, I discovered she'd married and moved on to San Francisco." Katherine smiled ruefully. "I had enough money for a ticket to Rico or back east, but not all the way to California. I chose Rico. Unfortunate choice." "It seemed like fate at first," Katherine admitted. "Mrs. Holloway needed help at the saloon, offered room and board plus wages. I thought I'd save enough to continue west or return east. Then you smiled at the judge," Xavier finished quietly. Katherine's hands tightened in her lap. "Such a small thing to alter a life." Xavier's gaze was steady on her profile. "Smile for me instead," he said softly. Katherine turned to him, startled. "Not because I demand it," he clarified, "but because I'd rather see you smile than afraid." The smile that curved Katherine's lips then was genuine, warming her eyes. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings growing beyond gratitude or obligation. A week passed, then two. No riders appeared on the trail to the cabin, no sign that Thornton's men had traced her location. Katherine began to hope that perhaps they'd given up, moved on to easier prey. Hope died on a brilliant autumn morning when Xavier returned from checking his traps with a grim expression. "Riders," he said tersely. "3 of them asking questions at the mining camp down the valley." Katherine's hand flew to her throat. "Thornton's men," Xavier nodded. "They've been showing your likeness around, offering a reward." "I have to leave," Katherine said immediately. "If they find me here, you'll be in danger too." "We both need to go," Xavier agreed. "I've been anticipating this. I've got supplies packed, a route planned. There's an old friend in Wyoming who'll help us." "Wyoming," Katherine echoed. "That's hundreds of miles." "Which is why we should leave now, while we still have daylight." They worked quickly, loading only essentials onto the horses. Xavier buried or concealed anything that might reveal their destination, then stood in the cabin's doorway for a long moment, surveying the home he was abandoning. "I'm sorry," Katherine said, touching his arm. Xavier covered her hand with his. "Don't be. It's just a place." They rode hard that day, following game trails and stream beds to mask their tracks. Xavier's knowledge of the terrain kept them moving steadily northwest, away from the usual routes. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 30 miles, stopping only when the horses needed rest. They made camp in a sheltered gully, building a small fire that would be invisible from more than a few yards away. Xavier prepared a meager supper while Katherine tended the horses. "Will we make it to Wyoming?" she asked as they huddled near the fire's warmth. "If we're careful, I know places to resupply where no one will ask questions." Xavier studied her across the flames. "Are you certain you want to come with me? I could get you to the railroad at Grand Junction." "You could be in California in days." Katherine considered the option the safety of distance, the chance to start fresh where Thornton's influence couldn't reach. But the thought of continuing alone without Xavier's steady presence created a hollow feeling in her chest. "I'm certain," she said quietly, "unless you'd prefer to be rid of me." Xavier's eyes reflected the firelight. "No," he said, his voice rough. "That's not what I want." They slept close that night for warmth, though Xavier maintained a respectful distance. Katherine found herself drifting off to the sound of his breathing, feeling safer than she had any right to under the circumstances. The next day brought more hard riding, the landscape gradually changing as they moved into rockier terrain. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gathered, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. "There's an old line shack about 3 miles ahead," Xavier called over the rising wind. "We can shelter there." The rain became a deluge, soaking them to the skin despite their oilskin coats. By the time they reached the abandoned shack, little more than 4 walls and a leaking roof, they were chilled and miserable. Xavier worked quickly to secure the horses in the attached lean-to and gather firewood that had been stacked inside. Soon a fire blazed in the small stone fireplace, offering welcome heat. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Xavier said, turning his back to give Katherine privacy. "Use my spare shirt and hang yours to dry." Katherine changed quickly, Xavier's shirt hanging to her knees. When she was decent, he did the same, stripping to his undershirt and pants. They spread their wet garments near the fire, then huddled close to the flames, shivering. "This reminds me of a storm that hit during a cattle drive," Xavier said, breaking the silence. "My brother and I took shelter in a cave. He was so mad because his new boots got ruined." "You must miss him," Katherine said softly. Xavier nodded, his profile strong in the firelight. "Every day. Thomas was the better of us, always laughing, always seeing the good in people. Even when Thornton started moving against the smaller ranches, Thomas believed we could reason with him." "What happened?" "Thornton wanted our water rights. When my father refused to sell, accidents started happening. Cattle disappeared, fences were cut." Xavier's voice hardened. "Then our barn burned. Thomas died trying to save the horses. And your parents?" "My father didn't survive the winter. Grief took him as surely as any bullet. My mother lives with her sister in Austin now." Xavier stared into the flames. "I stayed to fight Thornton, but he had the law, the banks, everyone important in his pocket. In the end, I had to leave or be hanged for something I didn't do." Katherine placed her hand over his. "And you've been alone since then." Xavier turned his hand to clasp hers. "Until now." The storm raged through the night, but they remained warm and dry, sleeping side by side on their bedrolls. When morning came, the world was washed clean, sunlight sparkling on wet leaves. They continued their journey, more cautious now, avoiding settlements and keeping to the wilderness. 5 days later, they crossed into Wyoming territory. The land was vaster here, the horizon stretching endlessly under an enormous sky. "My friend's ranch is near the Medicine Bow Mountains," Xavier explained as they rode. "Jack Harlow and I drove cattle together years ago. He's a good man, married a Shoshone woman named Brightwater. They'll give us sanctuary while we decide what to do next." "What will we do?" Katherine asked, the question that had been hovering between them finally spoken aloud. Xavier reined his horse to a stop, turning in the saddle to face her. "That depends on what you want, Katherine." It was the first time he'd used her given name. It sounded right in his voice, warm and intimate. "I want to be free," she said simply. "Not running, not hiding. That may take time. Thornton is stubborn. Then perhaps we need to be stubborn too." Xavier's eyes held hers. Katherine nodded slowly. "If you'll have me as a partner in this fight." "I'd have you as more than that," Xavier said, his voice low and intense. "These weeks with you, I never expected to find something worth protecting again. Someone who makes me want to build rather than just survive." Katherine's heart quickened. "I feel the same." Xavier urged his horse closer until his knee touched hers. "When this is over, when we're truly free, I want to make a life with you, Katherine Miller, if you'll have me." "I will," she said, reaching across to touch his weather-roughened cheek. "I already know there's no one I'd rather face life with." The kiss they shared there, mounted on their horses under the vast Wyoming sky, sealed a promise neither took lightly. They reached the Harlow Ranch 3 days later. Jack and Brightwater welcomed them with open arms, providing sanctuary without questions. Their 2 young sons regarded the newcomers with fascination, especially Katherine, who soon won them over with stories and small whittled toys Xavier crafted in the evenings. As autumn deepened toward winter, they began to hope that perhaps they'd truly escaped Thornton's reach. Xavier helped Jack with ranch work while Katherine assisted Brightwater with household tasks and the children's schooling. One evening, as they sat together on the porch after the others had retired, Xavier took Katherine's hand. "Jack offered me a partnership in the ranch," he said quietly. "There's good land to the east he wants to expand into, needs another experienced hand to help manage it." "That's wonderful," Katherine said, genuinely pleased. "There's a catch," Xavier continued. "We'd need to go into Laramie occasionally for supplies, banking. We couldn't stay hidden forever." Katherine considered this. Perhaps it's time to stop hiding and start fighting. Xavier studied her face in the moonlight. "What do you mean?" "Thornton's power comes from fear and money. What if we could take one or both away?" "How? You said he falsely accused you to drive you from Texas." "What if we could prove it, or expose his other crimes?" Xavier was silent for a long moment. "It would be dangerous." "Living in fear is dangerous too," Katherine countered. "I don't want to spend my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when he'll find us." In the weeks that followed, they made careful plans. Jack had connections with a newspaper editor in Cheyenne and a former U.S. Marshal who now worked as a Pinkerton detective. Letters were dispatched, inquiries made discreetly. When the first snow fell, bringing a hush to the land, they received a visitor, the detective, a weathered man named Rafe Donovan, who brought surprising news. "Thornton's empire is crumbling," he told them as they gathered around the Harlow's kitchen table. "The new territorial governor is cleaning house, investigating corruption. The judge has already been indicted for taking bribes." "And Thornton?" Xavier asked tensely, desperate. "He's lost contracts, creditors are calling in debts." "That's why he's been so determined to find Miss Miller to save face, show he still has power." "So if we return to Rico now," Katherine began, "you'd be walking into danger," Donovan warned. "But with evidence of his crimes, you could help bring him down completely." Xavier's hand found Catherine's under the table. "What evidence?" "I've been collecting statements from people he's wronged, including your neighbors in Texas, Mr. Grayson. And I found a former associate of his who's willing to testify about the fire at your family's ranch." Hope kindled in Xavier's eyes. "You mean?" "I mean we can prove Thornton ordered your brother's death. That, along with evidence of land fraud, intimidation, and corruption, will put him away for good. The plan they developed was risky but thorough." Donovan would return to Rico with documents and witnesses. Xavier and Katherine would follow a week later, after the groundwork was laid. "Are you sure about this?" Xavier asked Katherine the night before their departure. They stood in the barn where he'd been brushing down their horses, preparing for the journey. "I'm sure about us," she answered, stepping into his embrace. "Everything else we'll face together." Xavier's arms tightened around her. "When this is over, I want to marry you properly. Build a home here or Texas or wherever you want to be." "I'd marry you tonight if I could," Katherine whispered against his chest. "Then let's make it official before we go," Xavier said, pulling back to look into her eyes. "Jack's a justice of the peace. We could have a small ceremony here, with the Harlows as witnesses." "Really?" Now, Xavier smiled, that rare, transformative expression that had first captured her heart. "I want to face whatever comes as your husband, not just your protector." They were married the next morning in the Harlows' parlor, bright water's intricate beadwork adorning Catherine's dress, Jack's silver pocket watch tucked into Xavier's vest. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, spoken against the backdrop of snow-covered mountains visible through the windows. 2 days later, they departed for Rico, determination replacing fear as they rode south. They traveled cautiously but openly, no longer fugitives but citizens seeking justice. Rico had changed in the months since Catherine's flight. The territorial governor's investigations had shaken the town's power structure. The Golden Nugget was under new management, Mrs. Holloway having departed hastily when questions about her business practices arose. They took rooms at the hotel under their real names, Xavier's arm protectively around Catherine's waist as they signed the register. The clerk's eyes widened in recognition, but he said nothing, a sign of how thoroughly the wind had shifted. Donovan met them that evening, bringing news that the judge had been arrested that very day. "Thornton knows you're back," he warned. "He's cornered, which makes him dangerous. Stay vigilant." They didn't have to wait long. The confrontation came the following day as they walked to the territorial office to file their formal statements. Thornton appeared from an alley, flanked by 2 hired guns, his once imposing figure now haggard, his eyes burning with hatred. "You've cost me everything," he snarled at Xavier, ignoring Katherine completely. "I'll see you dead before I hang." Xavier stepped in front of Katherine. "It's over, Thornton. The governor has your records. Your partners have turned on you. The only choice you have now is whether to face trial or add more charges." "I still have one choice left," Thornton growled, reaching for his pistol. What happened next would be told and retold in Rico for years to come. Thornton drew, but Xavier was faster not to kill but to disarm, his bullet striking Thornton's shoulder. The hired guns, seeing which way the wind blew, surrendered without firing a shot. By nightfall, Silas Thornton occupied a cell in the territorial jail, his empire dismantled, his threats rendered empty. "I never thought I'd see this day," Xavier said as they stood on the hotel balcony looking out over the town. "Thomas can rest now." Katherine leaned into his side. "And we can begin." "Begin what, Mrs. Grayson?" Xavier asked, his arms circling her waist. "Our life, our future." She turned in his embrace. "Jack's offer of partnership is still open, Or we could reclaim your family's ranch in Texas, or find somewhere entirely new. Wherever you smile is home to me, Xavier said, kissing her softly. They chose Wyoming in the end, accepting Jack Harlow's partnership offer. The land to the east proved fertile for cattle and crops alike, and within 2 years, they had built a sturdy home of their own on a rise overlooking a pristine valley. When their first child was born, a son they named Thomas, after Xavier's brother, the circle of healing seemed complete. Katherine would sometimes catch Xavier watching her as she rocked their baby, his eyes full of a wonder that matched her own. "What are you thinking?" she asked one such evening as sunset painted their home in gold. "I'm thinking about smiles," he answered, coming to kneel beside her chair. "How one smile in a saloon changed everything. How your smiles have healed parts of me I thought were broken forever." "They weren't broken," Katherine said, touching his face tenderly, "just waiting for the right reason to mend." As years passed, their family grew. A daughter joined Thomas, then another son. The ranch prospered, becoming known for its fair practices and quality stock. Xavier and Katherine became respected figures in the community, their story of standing against corruption inspiring others. Sometimes, on clear nights, they would sit on their porch after the children were asleep, looking up at stars that seemed close enough to touch. In those quiet moments, Katherine would often think of that desperate night she fled Rico, how one decision, one collision in a dark alley had altered her entire life. "You ever regret it?" she asked Xavier on their 10th anniversary as they walked the boundaries of their property, hand in hand. Taking in a strange woman running from danger, Xavier stopped, turning to face her with the smile that still made her heart quicken after all these years. "The only thing I regret is that we didn't meet sooner." "We met exactly when we needed to," Katherine replied, stretching up to kiss him. And there, under the vast Wyoming sky, surrounded by the life they had built together, they knew it was true. Some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginnings, lead exactly where they're meant to, not to a place, but to a person, a love, a home that exists wherever they stand together.